Hey guys, and welcome back to another one of these videos. So recently in my little English tuition class that we have, we went through a structure a couple of weeks ago, and they just got their mock results back and they actually did very well, and the teacher specifically said, and the examiner they had specifically said, that it was because of the structure they used. So I figured I'd just do a quick summary of what you can expect from English language paper 1, and then we'll do another video for paper 2. So this is specifically for AQA, but you can learn some stuff for the other exam boards too. So before the exam, most important thing to do is think about which order you'll do the questions in. So normally, go question 1 to 5, yeah, shocking. But some people prefer to start with question 5 first. So again, this is just complete personal preference. And when you're in the exam, what you're going to do is you're going to quickly read through the four questions, right? The fifth one is not really related to the text normally. So you're going to read through the 4 questions really quickly. And what that will let your brain do is it will pick out what parts are going to be important for when you actually come to answer the questions. It will do it subconsciously. So read the questions, and then you're going to spend 15 minutes reading the text. It might not take you that long, so if you read faster than that, that's totally fine. If you read a bit slower than that, you should try and speed up a little bit. You can improve your reading speed. And what you're going to do is you're just going to annotate key quotes and sections for later use, okay? So for example, if there's one bit about the structure, there's always a question about the structure, kind of highlight the certain things about maybe sentence length or how the weather changes or something like that. Just make a note of it on the actual insert itself. And that'll be it for the first 15 minutes. Question 1. So this is normally just a list 4 things question. So it's a list 4 things you can learn about something in the paragraph. So all you're going to do is underline the keywords in the question. So it might be about the mountain or about the person or something specific. Misreading these questions is the only thing that costs students marks. That and the fact that at least one of the points will not be explicitly stated. So let's say they're talking about, list 4 things about the mountain, and the text says, the mountain is in France, the mountain is high, or whatever. They might not explicitly say something about the mountain. So for example, maybe something about an avalanche or something like that. They might not specifically say it, but if you can infer it, then you're also going to write those down. But again, you need to make sure they're either explicitly stated or very heavily hinted. You can infer it, okay? And you should spend no more than 5 minutes. Okay, you should just quickly write those down or tick them. So in AQA, they normally just have a true or false thing. No more than 5 minutes should be nice and quick after you've read the full insert. Question 2 is where it gets a bit more interesting. So I recommend spending 10 minutes on this question, and you're going to do 2 paragraphs, 2 PEE paragraphs, so point, evidence, explanation. And this is all about the language effects on the reader. So the reason why I put reader in capitals is that sometimes students write about the author itself or write about someone else. This is specifically the impact it has on you. So again, you're going to do 2 of these paragraphs. So what you should do is read the question and underline keywords. You're going to notice a pattern when I go to the next questions. It's always read the question carefully and underline keywords. And you want to make sure that your points directly answer the question. So there is a tendency for students to kind of be a bit more abstract and kind of almost answer a question that they wanted to be asked, as opposed to actually answering the question that has been asked. Make sure they directly link to the question. Otherwise, you won't get any marks for it. You won't be graded at all for that part that isn't related. You're going to pick some quotes as evidence, and you're going to identify the language devices specifically. You don't really need to talk about the structure, so to speak, just about the language devices. So highlighting keywords is also quite important. So if there's a specific word that the writer has used, think about why they've used that word and really zoom in on that single word. So the use of this word connotates this. And what you're going to do is explain the effect, or plural, on the reader, not the author itself. And don't forget to use words from the question in your response. Use quotes from outside, so don't use quotes from outside the section described in the question. Because again, let's say they say, read lines 10 to 18, right? And you quote something in line 19 or in line 9 or something else, you can't get graded for it. So even if you write the best possible thing ever, perfect English, you can't be marked on it. They'll just put a line through it and they'll ignore it. So be really careful with that. Again, should only take 10 minutes. So here are the sentence structures I would personally recommend. So this is what I'm talking about with this structure. So how does the writer use language to insert, and then blank. So it could be anything, right? This is the beginning of your first paragraph. The writer uses something, so a language device, could be simile, could be metaphor, could be anything, to describe whatever the question says. So it could be, how does the writer use language to illustrate someone's loneliness? So the writer uses a metaphor, or it could be pathetic fallacy. So it could be that it's raining, for example, or it could be that it's very cold outside, so it feels like isolating. So they're shut inside, for example, to describe the person's isolation or loneliness. This is shown in the quotation, then you're literally just going to quote where that word or language device has been used. The use of the word something has connotations of, because, so that's a really important thing. You need to justify what you're saying. So if you say it has connotations of loneliness and isolation, then you need to say why. So when I said that the weather being cold and snowing outside has connotations of isolation, because why? Well, it's because it's cold, there's warmth for human touch and human contact. You feel warm when you're with your friends. So if it's really cold outside, then you can kind of infer the opposite, that they're feeling cold and isolated. Okay, so something like that. This makes the reader feel something. Again, could be anything, because insert reason. So you could say that the reader feels sympathy for the person because feeling lonely and isolated is a depressed quality. We all crave human interaction. Then you want to start your next paragraph. It's really good to link these together. So sometimes people will just write, the writer uses this. So then it's almost as if you've written two separate paragraphs and glued them together. A really key point about your structure in your English language is to make sure things flow. So when you read this makes the reader feel blah because blah. Furthermore, the writer uses, you can tell that it's written together. That might sound a bit abstract, but this is something that you're graded on overall, your technical accuracy. You need to make sure your words and your sentences and your paragraphs flow into each other. And it's the exact same structure again. Okay, so you're taking 2 points, 2 pieces of evidence, 2 explanations, okay? So 2 PE paragraphs for question 2. 10 minutes shouldn't take that long. In terms of the actual length, it doesn't matter, right? Like these paragraphs could be, in my case, I've written them as 4 sentences each. You could extend that, or you could make it smaller. In my opinion, I prefer to write as little as possible for as many marks as possible. All about that efficiency. For question 3, again, you want to spend 10 minutes and you can have 2 or 3 paragraphs. So again, the reason why I put this here is because a lot of students ask me, how much should I write? It doesn't actually matter, right? What matters is you actually hit the points on the mark scheme. I personally recommend 3 paragraphs for this, because this is all about the structure and how it's used to interest the reader. So how they're using the structure to illustrate something, okay, to do something. So there are various ways that they can do that. So in terms of do, again, read the question and underline keywords. Then you want to track how things change and shift over the whole source. So it could be pacing, could be the length of the paragraphs as well. So for example, they may, in like the intro section, they could spend 4 paragraphs at home. Then when they're traveling, they might only spend 2 paragraphs. And when they get there, they only spend 1 paragraph. And the point is there is that it's speeding up, right? It's building tension, because instead of it being long and slow, it's going shorter and shorter, faster and faster. That's one thing that they can do. So that's again why I recommend 3 paragraphs. And you're going to focus on the beginning, middle and end. Technically, you could get away with doing 2 paragraphs and just doing the beginning and the end. Okay, and then talking about like that. That's what I mean by it doesn't matter how much you write per se. And then you explain the effects on the reader. So again, as I said before, if you're kind of spending more paragraphs in a location, that's quite slow and it's calm. But then as they're traveling, if you're shortening the number of paragraphs, and then when they get there, you're shortening it even further, so they're traveling a further distance in fewer sentences, that's building tension, right? It's kind of building up to this edge. And then short sentences, again, can be used to make things faster. Again, don't forget to use words from the question in your response. Okay, so how does it interest the reader? You want to always reference interest the reader, right? And you don't have to mention sentence length or structures. So again, I did mention sentence length just then. You don't have to, though, because sometimes it's not interesting. Sometimes the writer hasn't done anything unique about the length of the sentences or the structure of them, which is totally fine. It could be the sense of the actual paragraph that's interesting. And here are the structure. Here's the structure that I recommend. So again, this is the one that a few of my students used to get, I think it was 2 grade 8s and a grade 9 in their last kind of mock. Again, 10 minutes, 2 PEs. So in the beginning, the writer focuses on the reader's interest on. This is shown in the quotation. This could interest the reader by making them feel something because something. Then you want to repeat for the middle. So in the middle of the extract, the writer shifts the reader's focus. Could be an interesting way of introducing it. And then at the end. But in terms of the other parts, they're all the same. So again, as I go through these structures, feel free to kind of pause the video and like note them down or screenshot them, just so you can have like a reference to them. Question 4, which is the last of the kind of unique ones, because question 5 is completely disconnected from the source. evaluating a statement. So what will happen is it might say, I don't know why I thought Jeffrey, but sure, Jeffrey says this. To what extent do you agree? And you can disagree, you can somewhat agree, or you can fully agree. And you can also disagree strongly, things like that as well. This I'd recommend spending 20 minutes on, and you're going to write 3 or 4 paragraphs, PEs. Again, doesn't matter how many you write necessarily, depending on how much. And we're going to go through the actual mark scheme later on about what they're looking for. So that'll make a bit more sense towards the end. Again, read the question, underline keywords. Now, you want your big idea. Your first kind of sentence, or 2 sentences, should just be, what's your overall opinion? Okay. The reason for this is one of the examiner reports actually came out and it said that with question 4, sometimes it's not clear what the student believes. Okay, so they may kind of put points for and against, and the kind of reader is like, I have no idea if they agree with this statement or not. It's kind of like how a politician talks, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So again, keep in mind they're trying to understand how well you can evaluate a statement. How well can you summarize your own feelings about something? And when someone summarizes their feelings about something, you know exactly how they feel about it, right? Or you can infer it quite strongly. So a good way to kind of avoid that is to summarize your overall opinion right at the beginning in a sentence or 2. That way, the examiner in their head will know what your opinion is, and then when they read it, they're looking at it through the lens of agree, disagree, somewhat agree. Agreeing tends to be easier, but you don't have to agree fully. So you can say agree somewhat or agree. Those would be the easier ones to do, but you can disagree as well if you want. It's completely up to you. Make clear points to answer the question. Again, a common thing in the examiner's reports is that it seems like students don't answer the question. They just answer a different question. Using quotes, you're going to identify language devices as well to support your claim. And again, focusing on key words. So specific adjectives or verbs or whatever that the writer has used. And you're going to explain the effects on the reader. So it's always about the effects. Do not, again, forget to use words from the question in your response. Do not use quotes from outside the section. And do not forget to identify and analyse the effects of devices and language. So again, shockingly, in the English language paper, a big part of the mark scheme is about how well you can analyse the language and the language devices that are used in a piece of text. So make sure you write that out. It's very good in the back of your head just to keep in mind what the examiners are looking for. Okay, because you're not doing this for fun, right? You're doing this because the examiners need to test how well you can do certain things. So here is what I would say is the sentence starters and the paragraph starters. So one student on reading the extract said something, to what extent do you agree? So I wholeheartedly or partially agree with the statement. You can also disagree, but again, I did recommend agreeing to at least some extent to make it slightly easier for yourself. And then again, you're going to have 3 paragraphs here. So this is why I said 3 or 4 paragraphs, because this one you could count as a paragraph. You're more than welcome to add another paragraph afterwards as well, but again, keep in mind you are under timed conditions. It's difficult to write all of this stuff in a fixed amount of time. So the writer uses insert language device to insert effect. This is shown by a certain quotation, because again, you always need to have evidence. Always. Generally speaking, it's not too bad. Like, you know, the writer uses a simile. Well, you can just quote the simile. That's it. Nice and easy. The use of the word blank. So might be part of the simile, a certain word that they've used, an adjective or a verb. What connotations does it have? So what can you draw from that? And this makes the reader feel. So again, it's very similar to our previous structures, and you're just basically copy and pasting this 3 times. So you can use furthermore, or you can use, you know, secondly and thirdly, you can use furthermore, moreover, etc. Use a decent connective, and yeah, the structure pretty much stays the same. So I hope that makes a bit more sense. Now for the tricky one. Okay, this one was very hard to write a structure for, so instead I'm going to give you a bit more just kind of advice instead, and I'm also going to show you a few bits of the mark scheme to try and help you out. So this is writing to describe or narrate. Now, for 99% of people, writing a description based on the image is easier because A, you have a visual stimulus, right? It will help you. Your brain will automatically come up with links and connotations when you look at a picture, right? So if you look at a picture of a beach, what's the connotations? Well, it's nice and warm, it's sunny, there's family, you know, you're just instantly doing it. You don't need to think about it. Also, with writing stories, students don't always tend to do that well. Sometimes they have really overcomplicated plots. You know, you're not writing a Marvel film, right? Like, take it back a notch. Or they might do something called well, they don't show, don't tell, if that makes sense. So show, don't tell just means, instead of saying, you know, this person's called Harry, he is sad. He is sad because. That's boring. Instead, you can kind of say, okay, he hung his head as he walked along and shuffled his feet. That way the reader can interpret how they're feeling rather than just being told how they're feeling. But that's really only if you're doing some kind of story elements. So the description tends to be easier for some people, for most people. But again, if you want to write a story, you're more than welcome to, and always make a plan. So technically, they're not really, they want to mark you on your plan as well, technically, right? So you need to lay it out, make it look nice and neat. It only really needs to be a few bullet points, realistically. But this is a 45-minute section, and you're going to write at maximum 2 pages. The reason why I put a maximum here is because quantity is not marked, ever, in any of these questions. It doesn't matter how much you write, it matters how much they can mark you for. And we're going to go onto the mark scheme right after this, so you'll be able to see exactly what they're marking you on. But I want to limit you to a 1.5 to 2 pages. That way you're not wasting time, and you can actually concentrate more good quality writing into a smaller area, right? If you write 10 pages, and every now and then there's a language device, you will get marked less as someone that wrote 1.5 to 2 pages but has 5 times the number of language devices per page, right? So over 10 pages, if you use 10 language devices versus 2 pages and 5 devices per page, there's a big difference, okay? And a good thing to do, so this is just kind of general writing advice realistically, is you always want to use pathetic fallacy as much as humanly possible. To be fair, you can do this pretty much all the time. So you want to describe the weather to set the mood. This happens in film and television all the time, happens in books all the time. The weather is such a powerful tool. So for example, if it's somber or depressed or kind of mellow, you use rain. If it's angry, you can have like a thunderstorm going on and like waves kind of splashing about. If it's isolating, you can have like a frosty, cold or snowing atmosphere. If it's a very happy and pleasant occasion, you can have a nice sunny atmosphere, right? And then what you want to do is show how the weather changes. The weather changing, linking to the emotions of the characters, is really, really powerful. So for example, you could have something start off nice and sunny and bright, and then something terrible happens, right? And then all of a sudden storm clouds come over and then it starts raining. It mirrors the emotional state. That change is very similar to question 3, right? Sorry, question 4, the structure of the text. Sorry, no, it is question 3. Okay? Do you know, so with the structure, you talk about how kind of the sentence structure might change over time or how it changes from beginning to end. If you mimic that, and instead you're showing how the weather changes over time or how the paragraph structure changes from beginning to end or how the sentence structure changes from beginning to end, that's a really, really good sign because professional authors are doing that. So if you can do that as well, at least somewhat competently, it's a really good sign for your English language. So again, maybe show the weather changing, okay? And make sure it reflects the character's moods, okay? Because that's kind of the point. So yeah, anytime you introduce a character, you can kind of introduce them using the weather to illustrate how they might be feeling. Flashbacks are really interesting that you can use. It's a very interesting device. Again, it's a common literary device. So using it means that you're using a device that a professional author is doing. If you do it well, really good sign. Examiner marks you higher. I will kind of quickly, as a quick aside, the marking is done a lot on the kind of examiner's preferences in the sense that they have a lot more control. Like with a maths exam, you know, the answer is this answer. In a science exam, the answer is this answer. With essay-based subjects such as English, the examiner has more control over how many marks you get. So if you do something well, they'll be impressed with you and they'll give you more marks. Okay. So yeah, so I would always, not always, but I'll try and use a flashback. Okay. Again, you're not trying to write some like professional screenplay. Just try and get these things in there. So use pathetic fallacy, then use a flashback. Using multiple language devices, if you do it well, it goes well for you. So again, how does a person or building remind the character of their past, right? So maybe a person is approaching them and they look like their mother or something, right? Or they walk past an orphanage and it turns out that the character is adopted, right? It's revealing information in an interesting way. Or if they walk past someone that looks like their dad and it turns out their dad was maybe not the nicest dad in the world. And then again, describe the weather again at the end. Has it gotten better or worse? So it starts to, if they feel depressed at the beginning, but they begin to feel better, maybe rays of sunshine start going through the clouds, showing that they're still sad, but it's kind of breaking apart the kind of depressive feelings. And lastly, something should happen, right? Life is not this still image, okay? Even though they've given you a still image, things happen, things change. An easy thing to do is let your characters walk or drive or whatever. Because if they're moving, things are happening naturally. So, okay, they walk past this shop, and then towards the end of the book, your question answer, your response, towards the end of it, maybe they get to the end of the street or the end of the road, or they leave the shopping centre or whatever. Something's happened, things have occurred, time has passed. It's a really good thing to use, right? Things don't happen in still frames. So people approaching, right? So you could say, I spied a man in the distance, he was quite far away, I could barely make him out. But then slightly later you say, the man was closer now and I can make out his facial features. You know, it's more interesting, things are happening. Or even a building that your character walks past. In terms of first or third person, it's marked completely evenly. You don't have to use third person, you don't have to use first, use whatever you prefer. And that's because mainly in many books, authors just pick whichever one they prefer. So a lot of authors use third person, so even if they're using like a character's perspective, they might say, he said this, she said this, instead of saying, I did. Again, it's completely fine. So here's some kind of sentence starters that I found online. Honestly, if you Google these, you can find millions of them. So I wouldn't recommend like paying anyone for theirs unless they seem to be absolutely amazing. These are a few that I just kind of came across online. So the ashy clouds blocked out the sun, blanketing the sky in a charcoal light. Again, it's interesting imagery, and there's also kind of like the weather coming on there, you know, clouds blocking out the sun. It's got a few different things going on. This second one is quite in-depth, so tumbling from the inky darkness, you know, kind of like the night sky, the raindrops crashed onto the pale face of a figure looking upwards who was lost in thought. Again, it's like interesting, right? Again, interesting is kind of subjective, I get that, but instead of just saying, you know, it was raining on someone looking up, you have some more stuff going on. Using simile and metaphor and imagery is way better than just saying exactly what's happening. Okay? You don't want it reading like an instruction manual, right? You want it to be more emotive. And even when you're talking to your friends, you'll find that you use emotive language. You don't always describe exactly what's happening. So yeah, it's all personal preference. So now let's get on to the mark scheme, probably the bit that you guys are waiting for. So some of you probably skipped ahead. Well, here we go. So drops. So how many language devices have you used, if any? Huge parts of the marks. Again, it's an English language paper, so your language devices mean a lot. Range of punctuation used correctly. So this is something that very few students know, at least in my experience. To get the very top marks for your kind of syntax and your structure, you need to at least use semicolons at least twice. Okay? Semicolons is considered advanced punctuation. You can also do things like hyphenate words, using regular colons, things like that. But you need to use advanced punctuation, otherwise you're limiting yourself in terms of your technical accuracy. Technical accuracy, if you look in your paper, it will literally break down how many marks you get for each, for the actual quality, what you're writing, versus your technical accuracy. You're going to limit yourself with that. You might drop up to 6 marks, maybe even more, if you don't use advanced punctuation, which is a tragedy. For opening or closing, is it interesting? Right? If I fall asleep reading your question, that's not a good idea. Again, use similes, metaphors, etc. P, planned. Have you planned interesting ideas and have you executed them? Again, they kind of mark you on your plan, okay? Structure, so have you structured your ideas using a range of sentences and paragraphs? Again, you don't want to have 5 paragraphs, all of 4 sentences long each, starting in the exact same way for question 5. Okay? But even when you look back at these structures I gave you earlier, have you noticed they do vary? Right? The openers for the paragraphs always vary. I don't just use the exact same words all the time, and you can vary them a bit more. So especially when you're doing like a story or like you're narrating something, you want to make sure this structure changes. Otherwise it's going to be very repetitive. Human beings are very good at picking out patterns. So if you put something in a pattern, you can kind of drone it out. Whereas if you start varying things, it makes it more interesting. Here is the descriptive devices I'd recommend that you use. So A-promise is the acronym. So alliteration is quite useful. So again, that's just starting with the multiple words with the same letter or sound. Personification, so giving inanimate objects human-like or people-like features. Rhetorical questions are really, really good, as well as repetition, so repeating similar ideas. Human beings pick up on that and it's more interesting. Onomatopoeia, so bang, crash, etc. Metaphors, similes and metaphors are always really, really good. Imagery, so saying, which is very similar to similes. It's hard to do imagery without similes or metaphors, but again, just introducing some of those. Varying your sentence length and structure is really good. So if your character's running from something or someone, you can make the sentences shorter to make them snappy. So when you're reading them, it's almost like you're out of breath, which is quite a good thing to do. You can make them long and drawn out to illustrate something that's slow and relaxed as well, which again can be a feeling you want to do. And then lastly, emotive language. So it's good to know. Realistically, you should definitely practice your adjectives. What I'd recommend that you do is, as you're writing, literally have Google open and look up synonyms for whatever words you're using. So if you're like, okay, I want him to feel sad, okay, well, what do I mean? Is it going to be anguish? Is it going to be grief? Is it going to be depression? What's it going to be? And each of these words have slightly different meanings, but they mean similar things. So sad just means you're sad. But, grief, right, is sad because of the loss of a loved one, right? It's more specific, it's more interesting. So definitely have, and verbs as well, by the way. So like clutching at straws to be more like animalistic, for example. It kind of gives the impression of claws instead, which could be something quite interesting, or like holding something really tightly because you're afraid someone's going to take it. That's what you mean by like clutching it close to your chest. It's more interesting, right? Instead of just saying he was holding it close to his chest, it's like, no, he's clutching it. He's terrified someone's going to take it from him. Something that could be interesting. So what I'd recommend is, if you're not too kind of good with words, I know that sounds a bit silly, but literally just start Googling it, right? So if you're writing stuff out, you could use a thesaurus technically. I'd recommend Googling it because it's faster to find the information you're looking for. But yeah, Google or the Oxford Dictionary website, something will help you kind of change which words you use, which is very, very good. If you repeat the word happy, sad, it's not going to go well for you, I promise. So, next we have the sentence starters, and this is the last thing we're going to do. So how to start sentences in different ways. iSpace. So starting with the ing words, so whistling, howling, glowing. Starting with a simile could be interesting. Starting with prepositions, which isn't always grammatically correct, but it is kind of an interesting way of doing it. So up above the person, the stars twinkled or something. Starting with an adverb. Suddenly this happened, right? It's more interesting. You're like, whoa, what happened? And it's sudden. Starting with adverbs, connectives, or ed words, so startled, etc. But again, mainly for the English language, you need to write more interestingly, okay? So I would recommend just going through this. Again, you can rewatch parts of the videos, screenshot whatever you need. If you want, you can request it as a PDF, and I'll just change it to a PDF and put it in the description. But other than that, let me know if you want to see this same thing for paper 2, and I'll see you in the next one.